Could you tell us about personal information, including name, title, and responsibilities in the Army?
Uh, I, I joined the Navy in 1951. I enlisted, it was a volunteer situation where they were recruiting for the Korean War. Uh, I joined the Navy and I actually went to, when I applied, they asked me some questions about what I would like to do, and I told them I would like to be a communicator, and that's how I ended up in the branch I was. I joined as an ordinary seaman. Did my training in HMCS Cornwallis, and I moved on from there to do my sea training on HMCS Quebec. I spent some time all the, the after my training. I spent a lot of time in the over around the out of the UK and up around Scandinavia and off Iceland, doing exercises with the British and the American fleet up there. That was part of our ongoing training system. That's what we did at the time, and it was a different. It was a different experience for me, but that's actually where I started from. It was a very exciting time for me when you're just 17 and you join the Navy. It was really exciting for me.
Could you tell us about the battlefields that you were part of?
When when we went to Korea, we were part of the United Nations task force that was doing blockade and naval patrols off the west coast of Korea. Our job mainly was to ensure that there was no interdiction from the north, people that were actually trying to infiltrate South Korea. Our job basically was we were part of the Train Busters Club. They actually decided that they would create a game for about this. Canadians were actually very good at it. It was part of what they did and how they did it. Canadians are famous for creating little situations in any war zone that has nothing to do with the war. Just train busting was just part of what they did. We actually did patrols off the islands on the west coast. Our job was to stop fishing vessels or just ordinary boats, pull them over to one side. We had a South Korean Marine officer on board, and he would go on a cutter and he would actually board the boat. He would investigate the boat, make sure they weren't bringing contraband or ammunition south. He would actually interview the people on the boat, and at his discretion, he would determine whether he thought they were a threat to South Korea or whether they were just actually who they said they were. They actually once in a while they would get somebody he was not too sure of. He would call over the gunboat that we always had with us, and they would take this individual either ashore or would they put him in another location where he could be interrogated further.
Could you tell us about your family?
My family, I have a my family has a long history of the military. My grandfather was in the Boer War. My father was in World War I and World War II. In World War I, he was actually at the Battle of Ypres, and he was gassed and bayoneted. You would think that would give him enough information that he's done his thing for the country. When the Second World War broke out, he actually re-enlisted again, but because of his age, he was not. They couldn't send him to a combat zone, so they gave him a job of in the Air Force, actually training Commonwealth Air Command pilots. He actually went to he never trained them to fly, that wasn't his thing, but he trained them how to go from a civilian life into a military life. And he was actually very good at it. In fact, that's how he ran the household, because he ran it like a military base, which was good for me when I joined. I had two uncles and three cousins that were in the Second World War. My father-in-law was in World War One and spent 27 years in the Scottish Regiment. He was actually based in Burma and in India. His oldest son joined the Navy in World War II, and his youngest son actually went to Korea. He was part of the RCR regiment, and he was actually at the Battle of Chai Li. I tried to get my children to join the military, but they're not going to have any part of it. So hopefully I'm the end of the military part of the family. So I have a long history or a long connection with the military.
So having parents in the Army, did it affect yourself in being enlisted?
It was easier for me when I enlisted. Actually, it was. My dad was a strict disciplinarian. When he said to do something, it was done. There was no excuses why it wasn't done. I guess the other part of this is after the Second World War, my dad stayed in the military and he became a part of the Air Cadet training program. So when I was 12 years old, I suddenly found myself in the Air Cadets. I didn't request it. My dad just said, we're going down to the high school, because it was the high school that ran it, and we went down there, and all of a sudden I have a uniform and I'm in the Air Cadets. It was very good for me when I joined the Navy, because I already understood how to shine my boots, press my pants, wash my own clothes. In fact, my dad insisted at home that when it was time for me to wash my shirts and all that, I washed my own shirts. He showed me how to press them. So it was very good for me. It helped me a lot when I joined the military.
Can you tell us about your childhood, where you were born and have attended school?
I was actually born in Point St. Charles in Montreal. I actually lived with my grandmother until I was 6 years old. My grandmother also had 12 children, and why she was looking after me, I never did understand that. However, it was a good thing in my life. My grandmother was one of those really old country people who didn't take any, how she raised 12 children and me, beyond me. I never could understand that. When I actually grew up and I found out what I was doing, I had no idea what I was going to do in school. I just went to school because, however, my time in the Air Cadets sort of changed me. Then I understood that maybe the career in the military is what I should be looking for. The actual, at that time, when you left school in that particular time, you either found a job, right, or you went in the military. And I didn't like the job I had. I only had it for less than a year, and I decided that maybe I should go in the military. So I actually decided that I would join the U.S. Marines. I went down and tried to enlist, and you have to have all the documentation, and I thought I had the documentation. The recruiting chief down there said, "You go home, son, and get all these papers filled out, and if your parents will sign them, come back next week and we'll give you a medical." I went home and my dad said, "I'm sorry, but you're not joining the Army." And he wanted me, of course, to go in the Air Force. And I said, "Well, I'm not going in the Air Force." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because the war will probably be over by the time I get through that." So we compromised. I joined the Navy. Joining the Navy was the second best thing I ever did in my life.
So what's the first best thing?
When I come back from Korea, I met this young lady and I got married.
So when you were joining the Army, can you tell us a little bit about the training that you had to go through?
The training was for young recruits. It was very not severe, but it was very definite. There was a lot of running around a parade square, doing assault course training, learning how to live in the Navy. Living in the Navy is quite different from living in the other military, Air Force or the Army. It has its own particular flavor and distinction. You actually live in a confined space with with 20, 30, or 40 other men. You have to learn that you're just part of a group, and the object is, besides being in the Navy, is to understand how to get along with your fellow shipmates. That served me well later in life because actually, for me, it worked out fine because the first thing I found out is I was not the most important person in the world or in the room, or it helped me a lot, and it probably changed my life from being a bratty little kid to somebody who actually thought he had some self-respect, and the self-respect I actually got from the military.
Can you tell us about the ship that you were assigned to and how you went to Korea?
I was actually I missed the first ship over that went because I was on another ship. But when my posting come up, I was drafted to HMCS Iroquois when it came back from its first trip. We did extensive refit, and we did some workup training, and then we sailed for Korea. Now, at the time when I went on Iroquois, I didn't know that I was actually going to go back to Korea. I'm sorry, the Iroquois. I didn't know I was going to go back to Korea. But that was the rotation that we had in the Navy, the same as, I guess, the Army regiments that went over. For me, it was, wow, I'm actually going to get and do something that my dad did. So I was off to Korea. Well, I'm actually fortunate. We went through down the East Coast, through the Panama Canal, back up to San Diego, from San Diego to Hawaii, from Hawaii to Guam, from Guam to Kwajalein, and then up to Hong Kong, and then into Sasebo, Japan. Sasebo, Japan being the U.S. Navy base, and that was our home base, and where we replenished stores and ammunition.
Do you recall the year that you went to Korea?
I left for Korea and I spent 11 months on the Iroquois, and I believe it was 8 months over in Korea, actually over in Korea.
And while you were on the ship, can you tell us about the routine that you went through every day?
The routine on a ship is very rigid. They actually we slept in hammocks. The hammocks were I'd never slept in a hammock except when we were actually in Cornwallis. They had a little one of the barracks set up as a typical mess deck. So in the morning at 6:30 they would shake you out of your hammock, and you'd take your hammock, you'd lash it up and put it in a stowage rack. And at night, after 7:30, 8 o'clock, after the officer to watch did his rounds, you put your hammock back up. That was providing that you didn't have a watch to stand between them. It was actually a very organized life, and I think for me it was something that I really did enjoy because everything was organized, but it was very rigid. There was no breaking the rules or anything like that.
So when you were leaving for Korea, did the government of Canada explain that the dispatch to Korea is not just a policing action, but a war with communism?
Well, actually, when we did get there, when we understood we were going to Korea, there was a lot of talk in the newspapers that there were peace talks going on. So I've never understood what they meant by peace talks. It was actually a
We can keep going. So the question was, when you were dispatched, did the government of Canada let you know it's a peacekeeping, or did you know it was at war with communism?
Well, at that time, everything was peacekeeping duty. That was Canada's. That's what Canada did. It has been doing since the end of the Second World War. A lot of people don't know that Canada, with 1% of the world's population, does 10% of the peacekeeping duties. So when we went there, that's what the government said it was. It was a peacekeeping endeavor for the Canadian military. I didn't know the difference. To me, it didn't make any difference. I was just quite enthusiastic about I'm finally going to catch up to what my dad did in his life.
Did you have an idea about what would end the war?
I'm sorry?
Did you have an idea of what would end the war?
Um, I never actually when I never understood exactly what the war was about until I got there, until I started to, when you got ashore, you could actually see the difference. Um, at first, when I got there, I never understood what I was doing in Korea. What glimpses I've seen, some of the places we went to, some of the villages we've seen, the conditions that the people lived in. My impression was this was a very austere the country that really, I mean, it wasn't the country I left. It was just a different country. It was actually one of the probably the best education I've had in a long time. I had a different interpretation of what Korea was. When I went there, I knew where Korea was on a map, but that was it. I had no idea. I didn't know what we were doing there. I had no idea what we were over there fighting for. And I never found out that until I went back and revisited Korea 57 years later. And that's actually what I seen the difference was. Those two pictures there, is it when I got off the plane on the revisit, I was amazed. I thought they had put us in the wrong country. When I got into the airport in Seoul, it was absolutely, I just couldn't believe it. However, we were only there about 6, 7 days, 8 days, I think. When we got there and we started traveling around the country, I was amazed. I never thought that any country, anybody could do this in such a short time. We've been in this country, or my parents have been here, and we've been here since the French came here in 1603, and it was a different, because we have a lot of history that we can go to. I never knew the history of Korea until I went to one of the events sponsored by the Veterans Affairs people. They gave me books on Korea. They gave me books on the history of Korea, some of the arts and cultures, some of the actual history that goes way back, 2000 BC. I was amazed at some of the stuff I found out when I started to read these books. It actually became sort of a program that I was going to do anyway. So I've been studying these books. I've been studying Korean history since I came back. And that's exactly the part that I talk about when I go to school, when we do these school things. I prefer to tell them that than tell them about the war or what happened to me. We were one of the fortunate ones. The HMCS Iroquois was the only naval casualties, but not on the trip I was on. And that happened on the first trip. 3 men were killed right. 4 died on the way to the hospital, and I think there was 7 or 8 that were injured. I'm sorry, 4 other injured. In the whole thing over there, that was the only casualties the Navy had. Compared to the Army, I still have the impression that we were fortunate. I'm not talking about the gentlemen that were killed on the first trip on the Iroquois, but actually we were fortunate. We did not have to go through the same things they were.
Could you show us the 2 pictures that you have ready?
You want me to hold them up for you? Certainly. Okay.
And then we just open the
Okay. So these 2 pictures are actually, it's taken from a book, and it's called Before and After in Korea. The black and white picture I'm holding in my right hand is what I remember in 1954 when I left Korea. And the colored picture I'm holding in my left hand is actually what I seen when I went back in 2010. When I got back there, I knew then exactly why I went to Korea in the first place. These pictures are actually what I take to the schools, and I try to explain to the children. That's the difference. I don't really believe we should go around and tell children about what people did in the war. I think that's not helpful to children. But that's a fact. That's exactly what I seen. I actually found out later why my dad would not let me join the Army. because my dad was in World War One, and he never explained anything to me about what he did in the war. I just knew he was there. He told me that. When I got back, he asked me, my impression of being in Korea, and I said, well, I mean, I can't say too much, but I was never sure why I was there. So he told me why he wouldn't let me join the army, why he wouldn't sign for me to join in the army. It was actually because he had some idea that the war in Korea, because he was reading about it in the newspapers, was going to be similar to World War One, where people dug holes in the ground, military people, soldiers, actually dug holes and moved up 100 yards one way and 100 yards back again, and were continually bombarded. So when he told me that, I actually knew then, because I'd already been to Korea, why my dad wouldn't let me join the army, but I also knew why I went to Korea in the first place.
Can you tell us about the medals that you have?
Okay, the medals here are, these ones here are all from the Korean government. This was given to Andy and I, or if you went back it was the 60th anniversary of the Incheon landing, okay. They invited Navy people back at that time. I'm sure other ones went back before us, but it was to commemorate the Battle of Incheon. And this is the Ambassador for Peace Medal. This was actually given to us again by the Korean government. This medal here, and I think Andy explained it, was given to us by some very generous Korean veterans we brought over. I was sort of embarrassed when this gentleman stood up and pinned it on me and said, and of course he was talking to me in Korean, he said, "This is for you." And I said, "I don't think I can take that because that's your medal." And actually what it was is they had only been issued this medal that same year. So it was, again, one of the other things that sort of impressed me about the Korea and the Korean people.
Can you tell us your life back in Canada? When did you come back to Canada?
When I arrived back in Canada, I was going to stay in the Navy for at least 30 years. That was my goal. When I got back to Montreal, they sent me back to Montreal because I'd already done my 3 years at sea. And that's part of the Navy tradition. You go to sea, and then all of a sudden you're on a shore base. That's so the people, you can go back and do further training, and it's part of the rotation they have. When I got back, I was already back in Montreal. I grew up in Montreal, and I was going to stay in for 30 years until I met this fabulous young lady who sort of convinced me that maybe I should find another career besides the Navy. So I got out, and that was the best thing I ever did. I got married, and I have 2 wonderful children. They live close by. My son is a doctor in Burlington, and my daughter is a teacher lives in Mississauga.
How does the war experience affect your life back in Canada?
It made me a little more grateful about what we have in this country. There's a big thing about living in Canada, and this is my own personal opinion. People take for granted what they have here. They've never had to experience, I'm talking about people who are my age that were born here. They've never had to experience that unless they've been to somewhere else in the country, have been part of a conflict somewhere. What it actually did for me, it made me appreciate more what I have in this country now. And even my children now are a little different. They don't take anything for granted. I'm sort of one of those lucky people who got this far in my life. Sometimes I sit and wonder how I got this far in my life. I mean, besides I've had, I had great parents, I had great relatives that helped me grow up. The Navy was my dad being in the military was great for me. I understood about self-respect, and if you want self-respect, you have to earn it. Going in the Navy was actually an education program for me. I got to see nearly all the places in the world. I've been around. We circumnavigated the globe on the HMCS Iroquois. When I got back, it was a different thing for me. I was actually now thinking about staying in, but in fact, I did get out. And I think being in the Navy was the big thing that changed my life.
Now, I think you consider your experience in military as an asset in your life.
Definitely.
In South Korea, every man serves a mandatory period about close to 2 years in military, and I think they might agree the aspects.
No, no. When I joined up, I signed up as a volunteer, and I actually signed to stay in the Navy for 5 years. I did stay in for 5 years, but I actually signed on in the reserves for 5 more. So I actually spent 10 years in the Navy.
I think you consider your experience in military to be an asset in your life. In South Korea, every man serves a mandatory period of about 2 years in military, and many would agree that their experience is an asset. Did you have any negative experience?
No.
Good. Just going back to your battlefield experiences, is there anything that you would like to share?
Actually, I think Andy went through it too, but the HMCS Iroquois was actually involved in a typhoon. It was it scary? Definitely. Anybody who says they weren't scared is either a fool or a non-believer. But yeah, was it scary? For me, it was. However, that wasn't what I expected. I was going to be the most thing that scared me over there. Actually, I thought we'd be, shot at by aircraft or from the shore. When I got there, we knew about the HMCS Iroquois, so that was always a threat. And the fact that the ceasefire was in there, that didn't mean the war ended. As a matter of fact, to this day, the war in Korea is still on. They're still because there was only a peace agreement. For me, that was probably one of the things. But actually, going through the typhoon was I didn't understand it till probably 2 days later. We were still out on patrol. We were getting ready to come back into be relieved by another ship, and when we got, I'm not sure where we were actually, but we were somewhere way off the coast of west coast of Korea. One of the lookouts spotted that there was something in the water, so he reported it to the captain. Everybody trained their binoculars on it, and we maneuvered the ship over. There was a gentleman, I'm not sure whether it was from North Korea or South Korea, because there was no way for us to determine. We just investigated. We actually went over. We come alongside. We sent up some sailors over the side, not over the side, and we actually brought him on board. He was actually floating on a wooden door. He had his boat, or his ship that he was on, was actually destroyed in the storm. It was a fishing boat, and from the stories we got from the officer on board who interpreted all this for us, he had lost his entire family, and his only means of livelihood was his fishing boat. So when I like to compare my life with, that was amazing. It was probably the thing I remember most, that particular incident. The other one was the fact that one of the islands that we patrolled had an orphanage on it, and they had nothing at all there. The children actually just wore whatever clothes they had. There was no difference between whether they were North Korean children or South Korean children. Some of them had just been abandoned by their parents because they're trying to escape one. Some of them were, orphaned because their parents were killed in the war. I believe the orphanage at that time was run by a missionary from Australia. However, when we got there, we gave them what we could. If we could give them food off the ship, we did. We would pass the hat around and raise some money, and we give it to the missionary. he said to us, if you're writing home to your parents, and he said, I assume you all do, and you're asking for something from home, he said, would you mind asking them if they could include some baby clothes? So I sent my little airgram back to my parents, and I told my mother, if you're out shopping and you're at the church sale, would you please pick up some baby clothes? And I never told her why, but the next parcel I did, I got some. And they were looking actually clothes for newborn babies right up. I think the children were up at around the eight or 10.
Do you recall how many people were on your ship and perhaps the demographics of the people on the ship?
Okay, the ship's companies change with the actual location you're going to, depending what the deployment is. I believe when the Iroquois went, we had 258 men on the ship. 180 to nearly 200 were all just lower deck seamen. The rest would be senior NCOs, petty officers, first class, second class chiefs, and we all lived in a different part of the ship. The men on the that were lower decks were actually forward, and the chiefs and petty officers were one or two decks up. But all the officers lived aft in the officers' quarters, and the living conditions were different. They had bunks, we had hammocks. The captain had his two cabins. He had a day cabin, and he had a sea cabin, and they ate the same food we did, but they had their own galley that prepared the food. So there was a difference in the structure of the Canadian Navy, but that's a fact because we're actually our tradition comes from the British Navy, and there was actually, if you get back in history, the tradition in the British Navy was the men were in the lower deck and they were forward, and the officers and the senior ratings were aft. And there was usually Marines in between back then. The British ships had Marines, and this is going back in, I don't know, 450 years in British Navy tradition. So we inherited the tradition, and basically that's where the ships meant the same thing to us. The 8 destroyers that were built to go to Korea were actually all constructed over in the UK. And out of the 27 tri-boats that were built, 13 were sunk. 13 were scrapped, and the only one that's surviving right now is HMCS Haida in Hamilton.
While you were in Korea, do you remember the routes that you were sailing to and from?
Actually, our home base was Sasebo, so when we went on patrol, and I'm not sure of the actual time we were on patrol, but we didn't spend a lot of time in Sasebo. When we went back, we did what we'd have to replenish ship. If there was some structural work we needed to do. I don't think there was many dry dock facilities there. So when we went, we were actually berthed out in the harbor. And if we went ashore, we took a duty boat. And if we came back, we had to take a duty boat. So our exposure to that part of Japan was limited. We did get 4 days every once in a while to go on R&R, but it was a group thing. Everybody went and everybody came back. If the ship went somewhere and it was like sort of showing the flag, it was actually like an excursion for us. But we were basically our time in Korea was either in Sasebo, replenishing, or actually off the coast, west coast of Korea.
So when you were replenishing, did you get to go into the village?
In Sasebo, Sasebo is not the most pleasant place I've ever been to in my life, because the Americans had already been there for 5 years, and they were still under military occupation. They had all the facilities. You just took the duty boat. You can go to one of the EM's club. You could change your diet. You can actually go in there and have something to eat. You can order a steak, order a beer. As far as sightseeing, we couldn't do much over in Japan. We did once or twice take a trip somewhere, but there wasn't much to see because the whole country was still under military occupation. But it was starting to be a little less severe then. I think at just about the time we were there, the U.S. had decided to relieve some of their troops out of the policing action, and they actually had now police in there. It was different. In Korea, we got to Incheon once. We spent I think we spent some time once in down at Busan, but that was it. I I've been to Incheon, but I've never been to Seoul. I never seen that part. I never actually seen the interior of Korea, and what I know is what I've read, but I did see the interior of Korea once I went to. Once I went back on a revisit. So it was actually it was a different sort of tour for me. Over in the UK, I've been everywhere over there. I've been when we were on the Quebec, I've been to Scandinavia and all through the UK and Scotland. But it was different. We were in a country, and those people were like past that part of the war. It was. If you really like history, it was really good for me. It opened my eyes to the rest of the world, and it sort of helped me understand how fortunate I am that I live in this country.
How did you communicate with your family when you were
I would write regularly. I had met a young lady over in England in 1953. And we became pen pals for all the time I was actually in the Navy. I would write back and forth together, and actually my sister decided she'd take up the ability to. She actually would write to to this young lady. It was getting very serious until when I came back from Korea. I was back about I think 3 or 4 weeks. And this lady decided she would actually, she didn't think it would be a great idea. And I understood it because I only met her for maybe 8 or 10 days over in the UK. And what happened is, being apart for nearly 2 years, I knew this was not going to go anywhere. But she was smart enough to tell me. So that's what.
yeah. Now, just back in Canada, there are many Korean war veterans.
Yes.
What's your role in the veterans community?
Actually, I'm part of a 2 or 3 veterans clubs. I'm a member of the Halton Naval Veterans Association, and I'm also treasurer for KVA Branch 26 in Hamilton. There's a connection that I can see now that I didn't know about before. These military clubs are getting smaller and smaller and smaller every year. We had at one time 26, and we were actually down to about 8 or 10 active members. If we have a meeting, we'd be lucky to get 8 or 10 people out, but we're still in contact. So all these veterans that I just mentioned, half of them will be down at the event on Sunday at Spencer Smith Park. It's a shame when you see this, because as the veterans decline because of their age, to get to the Second World War, you had to be over 90 based on, and if you went to Korea, you had to be over 80. That's the simple fact that there was an age requirement to go. As we get into smaller and smaller, my thoughts are what part of this country is going to do this that we're doing now? As the veterans die off, that story or that communication about about their time in the military it's not going to be around unless they documented it, and that's a shame, because this country is we do not teach history in this country very well, especially military history. And for some reason or other, there are people in the government here that think that talking about the military is bad for whoever. Well, if it wasn't for the military in this country, and what we did in the Boer War and the First World War and the Second World War and in Korea and all the peacekeeping missions that we had and in Afghanistan, I think people don't understand that if you're not prepared to take the issue with other countries that are having problems, and they maybe they can't support themselves military, and they're being taken over by for whatever the reason is, or for whether it's economical or it's because there's cultural differences, religious differences. The problem is going to war out of it over it is not the answer to anything, because it doesn't prove anything. Because at the end, when the war is over, you still have the same problems. You haven't fixed much. I can't say that about my experiences going to Korea, because I was actually one of those fortunate people who actually did see the difference. And for a young lad who didn't understand why he was there in the first place, it was that my experience in Korea and what I seen when I went back in 2010, and that's why I still do this.
Any last words?
Yeah, I'm. Whenever I do this, and this is a personal thing with me, when I went back to Korea, people there everywhere were very gracious. They were very sincere. When they say thank you, they mean thank you. Even yesterday, people I didn't know, I've never met them, they were Korean, come over and said thank you. I guess the difficulty is, I'm not sure I went there for anybody to say thank you to me, but the fact is that they would come over and say thank you is probably good enough for me, because it's that kind of thought and that kind of thing that makes this worthwhile doing.